This episode is brought to you in part by Akunu. Akunu for Sales is the first buyer-aware platform for account-based selling on Salesforce. Akunu integrates your sales process with buyer behavior to verify buyer-seller alignment and increase confidence in the status of your deals. It eliminates time-consuming data entry for sales reps and makes your sales pipeline and deal review meetings data-driven and much more efficient, giving your sales reps and their managers the time and insights needed to win more deals. So do you know how your deal review process stacks up against other B2B sales organizations? Visit akunu.com/accelerate to access Akunu's benchmark report revealing the deal review habits of B2B sales managers and tips for managing deal reviews. See how you stack up and create your action plan for a better deal management. Get your report at akunu.com/accelerate. That's AKOONU.com/accelerate. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 568 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Joining me on this episode today is Nadjya Ghausi. Nadjya is the Vice President of Marketing at Prezi. And in this episode, we're going to have a conversation about, perhaps not surprisingly, about presentations and how to become a more effective presenter. And we're also going to dive into some research about the science of effective presentations and what that research has found that are the three key factors that influence the success of your presentations. Nadjya and I are also going to talk about conversational presenting. And I'm looking forward to this because this is a different approach to making presentations that, quite frankly, I think we all need to learn and master. If you'd like to see a summary notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/568. Now, over the last couple weeks, I've been talking about a new research report I just produced. It's based on the input of over 300 leading entrepreneurs, sales leaders, thought leaders, experienced executives, people I've interviewed right here on Accelerate. And their support is all about what you can do to amp up and accelerate your sales right now. So this report is free. Go to accelerate.fm/accelerate to get your copy right now. That is accelerate.fm/accelerate to get your copy. I also mentioned last week that I'm going to be making some changes to Accelerate starting in the first week of October. And one of the changes will be there are actually going to be fewer episodes of Accelerate each week. And we're doing this because, somewhat ironically, one of the first comments I hear most often from listeners is that there are just too many episodes of Accelerate and that they really don't have the time to listen to each one. So I want to make sure that you don't miss a thing from any of the great conversations I have with my guests. So make sure you stay tuned to future episodes because we're going to give you more information about our new schedule then. As you heard at the beginning of this show, this episode is brought to you in part by Akunu. Akunu for Sales uses a visual framework to help sales reps sell in complex accounts and help sales managers coach and manage their reps. Enable sales organizations to improve their sales performance by surfacing the information that drives better execution, keeps sales reps and sales managers focused on following the sales process and engaging the right buyers at the right time. So check that out at akunu.com. Finally, before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that I want to hear your questions about sales and sales management. What are the challenges you're facing in your work? So if you send your question to me, each week I'll choose one question from those submitted the previous week to answer on my Friday conversation that I have with my regular and special guest, Bridget Gleason. And the winner, the person who submitted the question that we choose, will win a free half-hour coaching session with me. That's a $250 value, so you don't delay. You want to do it today. So you can send your questions two ways. One, you can send it to me at email, the old-fashioned way, andy@andypaul.com. Or if you just go to my website, andypaul.com, in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a red button that says Ask Your Question. Click on that, and you can leave it for us like a voice message. And the one we'll choose, if they submit it that way, will actually play their question on the air. So anyway, we want to hear your questions. Go to andypaul.com, click Submit Your Question, or you can send it to me at andy@andypaul.com. All right, let's get on with the show. Let's accelerate with our guest, Nadjya Ghausi. Welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you for having me today.
Hey, my pleasure. So before we jump into it, I've got a standard question I ask all my guests at the beginning of the show. So this question is, in your mind, in your opinion, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales professionals today?
There is so much noise in the marketplace today that if you think about what is sort of the evolving most finite resource out there in terms of sales, it's getting people's attention. Attention spans are decreasing. There's so much competition to capture people's imagination and engage with them that I think that and this is sort of a byproduct of all the investments of technology that it helped us identify the right people. But now we have to start thinking about the engagement part again. And there are different ways people are engaging virtually, in person, however. But the way to capture people's attention to me is going to be a success point and also very oftentimes a blind spot in the way the sales funnel has been sort of represented. It's kind of the handoff between sales and marketing, and oftentimes a very underinvested part of what makes a really successful sales cycle. I could go even further to say, when you think
go as far as you want.
All right, I'll keep going. So, when you think about, the sales cycle time, today there's a very common knowledge that, prospects come into these meetings, 60, 70% of their research is done before they've gotten there. You now have the opportunity to present. What can you do to connect with that prospect or customer very quickly and engage on the topics that they care about? Because, again, kind of a la accelerate, you're accelerating your sales cycle by honing in on what they want to talk about right away, as opposed to putting them through a sort of rigorous march that is sort of preordained. So there's a great opportunity here to sort of change the dynamic when people come and they actually have the presentation and what that dynamic looks like. And we've done a lot of research, and we think that it's sort of if you think about a capability or skill, that ability to adapt to what the prospects and customers want to talk about is something we call conversational presenting. We think it's a skill that great salespeople are going to have in the future. And this is one area we think is just a super important area to focus on. Okay.
Well, we're going to get to conversational presenting. So
sure.
Let's take a step back and just talk a little bit about Prezi and what they do, because it's a great tool, but I'm not sure everybody that's in the audience is aware of what you do and your capabilities. So give us a little background.
Sure. Prezi, we've been around since about 2009. We were founded then. A little bit unique in that the product was developed in Hungary. We moved to San Francisco. And since then, we've grown to a user base of about 85 million. So it's a very well-known product. We come up through the EDU market. We launched into the business market. And what's really great is it's given us a foothold of being introduced into businesses today from people who've used Prezi from prior experience. So Prezi is, as in terms of what it is, it's a presentation platform. And it's very unique in that it really allows people to connect more powerfully with their audience. It's not like traditional slides. Prezi is built on an open canvas that allows you to navigate through topics freely, have interaction, collaboration between you and viewers. And in the end, the presentation functions more like an engaging, memorable conversation. So Prezi sort of like his presentations evolved.
Okay, so let's go back and unpack that just a little bit so people understand. So unlike conventional sort of sequential slide decks you might do in PowerPoint or Keynote, so for people to visualize what Prezi is, it's, as I think you use the term map-like in your literature, but basically there's it's to think about your presentation being like on a big canvas that you sort of move through.
Exactly. So you would think a little differently in how you would structure a Prezi, because you're thinking about first of all, what's the example? How are you sort of trying to illustrate the topic that you're talking about? So you kind of work from having like your agenda, which is your topic bubbles, and then being able to underneath have Zoom reveal, which would bring up the different elements that you want to bring up at the time that's appropriate. And we have this So the way we built it is around smart structures, the ability to sort of move the content freely. But importantly, it's the dynamic nature of Prezi. If you've seen a Prezi, and many people probably have seen Prezis and not knowing what it was at keynotes and other types of events, because Prezi is very unique in the way it dynamically moves across. and because it's very flexible in nature. So the navigation is very unique relative to other sort of linear approaches. The nonlinear approach of Prezi is adapting again and having the topic and format and flow in the context of your audience.
Yeah, I mean it's more like watching a movie as opposed to watching a slideshow of your family trips.
Yeah, some people have called it a sort of a cinematic kind of thing. I've heard that before as well.
Well, yeah, with the zooming and panning functions, I mean, that seems very camera-like. So what was sort of the foundation about, developing Prezi? Why, who came up with it? And, you talk about this concept, the method of loci or loci, depending on how you pronounce it.
Yeah, the spatial element.
Right, the spatial element in terms of how that helps in terms of engagement and making yourself more memorable.
Yeah, no, there's a great story. Actually, we have 3 founders, and one of our founders was an architect / visual designer. And he was looking for a better way to communicate the ideas he had. And none of the products available in the market at that time really made any sort of good use of space. Space has meaning between objects, how big the objects are, where their relative location is. And so he sort of incorporated the dynamic movement with the spatial element that came up with this freeform canvas, which was a very different way to communicate ideas. So it actually was born out of necessity, where we had, a creative / designer / architect who, found, he was solving for his own needs and became something that caught on really quickly. What's amazing to me, and this is sort of a sidelight, but I've been in SaaS business for a long time, and this is one of the few products that sort of elicits an emotional response. We actually have love letters and breakup letters to Prezi here, that people are so emotionally tied to the product because you get very connected when you're creating your presentations in the product. So anyway, I find that kind of an interesting thing.
Well, what are the breakup letters?
Oh, well, we don't have the love letters on the wall. And the breakup letters are just more around, I've tried to use this and I couldn't do that. And so we kind of get a bit of everything.
Well, let's talk about creating a Prezi, because I mean, it's sort of second nature now. Almost anybody can present or develop a slide deck, whether it's graphically appealing or not. That's a whole second order question. But what are sort of the starting steps of how you prepare your content, I guess, for creating a Prezi?
Sure. Well, a couple things you would want to think about is, first of all, work from the end forward. So how do you want to leave your audience? What's the message you want them to take forward? Is there something you're trying to activate them with? So you kind of work backwards from that. Then you also think about what is the best visual examples that bring to life the story that you're trying to tell. You've heard the term metaphors. And so, example, if you're got a great goal, maybe it's like scaling a mountain. If you've got different pieces come together, it might be something like a jigsaw. There's as many different ways to sort of think about what's the structure of your story. And think about in terms of these main topics, so you don't become beholden to a single linear script. You're able to sort of compartmentalize and then tell your story, but still have that adaptability to flow into the different topics. So it's really important, when you think about what you're about to tell your audience is when you view a Prezi, you see what the presentation is going to be right up front. That is, the agenda is basically the material that is on the topical level that you would start with. So instantly, people know what you're going to talk about. You've already preset expectations with your audience. You enable that interaction to happen and right away. So I would say it's a little bit different. And when you think about a standard, sort of slide based, you can point A to point B to point C. Yeah, you've got to think about the relationship between the elements. Yeah.
Okay. So you need to think about the relationship. Suddenly I can hear people, salespeople start saying, I mean, is this a tool that's geared for, a sales type that has to put together a presentation to be able to step in and do? So
yeah, I mean, there's 2 places we see, like marketing sometimes creates the presentations for sales, so you have the corporate presentations. But for salespeople, the great part is like when you think about so you get the meeting, right? Whether it's virtual or in person from a sales perspective, you've already invested all that time on lead nurturing, lead scoring, cultivating that, making sure that you can get that meeting, you get to that meeting. And right away, and I talked earlier about the prospect knowing a bit about it coming into the meeting,
Sure.
you have that ability to zoom into what that prospect wants to hear about. Effectively what you can do is move from something like a introductory meeting to topics that maybe you wouldn't have covered till the discovery meeting. So when you think about the sales cycle time, you're able to condense that because you're moving very quickly into what they care about right away. There isn't that sort of, is it this, is it that? Right away they can kind of see what you offer very quickly. They already know what they know coming into that meeting. So we always think about the time-based element, with attention spans being shorter and sales cycles being so much more focused, knowing about people when you come into these meetings. Here's a chance to put it into play. And, effectively you can accelerate your sales cycle by adapting and then having those kind of conversations earlier than maybe you would have had before.
But to that point, though, about accelerating the sales conversations, is there something inherent in Prezi that enables you to do that versus, somebody presenting, an effective slide deck? Or
yeah. So what oftentimes we see, and where the big fails kind of happen here, is someone shows up with their 100-page slide deck and they start with, well, let me tell you about us. And they've got 100 slides on slide 99. So at that point, the prospect says, well, what I really want to hear about this. And then the guy says, well, I'm going to get there. Just wait a minute. I'm going to get there. It's that I'm going to get there moment.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that. You've got that ability to quickly say, okay, let me take you right here. So rather than having to figure out which slide, which order, which format, it's all very, very navigatable, if you will, to get points quickly. So that's what's fundamentally different. And I think, when you think about salespeople, they're not there. They don't really want to present. They really want to have a conversation. It's a fundamentally different kind of interaction, right? Because they're trying to solicit information at the same time, help steer, and share information, be helpful and be consultative in the process. So it's a different notion of present from a traditional format to what we call, I guess it leads into conversational presenting, which is the adaptability and to have the conversation so you talk with your audience, not at your audience.
Yeah, well, I think it's a fundamentally different skill set, because I think, as was pointed out in some of the literature that you had sent me, is that sales presenters, not just sales presenters in general, they're relying on PowerPoint or Keynote or something like that, is you're thinking about things in a very sequential, right? I can memorize the story in a very sequential, A leads to B, leads to C, and so on, where they have to be more a master of the subject matter in general if they're using a Prezi.
Absolutely. You have to be very comfortable with your material to do that. But that does exactly move them on that path of mastery to know about and how to talk about this with their customers, right? And, and what's super powerful is that, there's been studies shown that, versus just talking versus having some visual backups, that, the human brain gravitates towards visual content. If you think about it, presentations using visual aids in some of the studies we've done are about 43% more persuasive than the exact same presentation without visuals. So we've done a lot of science to find out, what is it that triggers that memorable moment, that aha moment with companies and in different use cases. Sales and marketing is a really critical one for Prezi, because we found this is one of the most underserved markets that are out there, really.
Sure. So what's your research show in terms of the difference between static visuals and, more motion visuals like you can support in Prezi?
Yeah. So if you think about, the goal in for a lot of the sales and marketing people is to have an interactive presentation. We've done surveys where we find that
I wouldn't say it's necessarily the goal. I think it'd be great if they did it, but I think 80% of salespeople are so petrified they just want to get through the boom, 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 boom and say they're done with it.
Well, this is interesting because we've done some surveys that showed that almost half of the presenters give interactive presentations based on the feedback of their audience about 60% of the time or more. So it's, things are changing in terms of expectations of customers today too. There's the dynamic of the millennials entering the workforce. It's not the same old static environment. People want to be engaged. They want to be brought along in a story. Storytelling is an important element when you think about how people talk about product. So storytelling has been a real benefit for Prezi because we help people bring people along in a memorable way. So it's not just the movement and the structure and the space, but also it's the framework by which the storytelling becomes the foundation of how people have that impression about your product.
And I think that's really one of the key things I see with Prezi for sales reps is, for all the talk there's about storytelling, it's still a hugely underdeveloped skill within the sales force in general. And I see this as a tool that actually, when they put in front of a customer, becomes much easier because it flows in a way that a story flows.
Exactly. And I think that the presenters feel more confident as well because they then can adapt and they have mastery. Kind of, you pointed that out earlier in the conversation about the material. And having a story is so much more impactful because that's what people remember, or they remember the sequence. They remember an aha moment from there.
Yeah. I mean, stories more memorable than data for sure. And I think that there's been numerous studies that show that that's the case.
Yeah.
So then, as I said, you sort of take it then sort of the next step, which is you talk about conversational presenting, which I think is an interesting concept because, again, I think most people when they're speaking in public or speaking in front of a group, and certainly it's been my experience with watching thousands of salespeople, is, again, the impetus is sort of to get through it and then engage in questions after the fact, as opposed to, hey, let's make this a true collaboration as we go through this process. And getting them over that hurdle, I think, is really, really important. And if this technology does that, then it's a great tool for them.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. There are different use cases. There's Prezi, that's the main tent TED speakers, which we've done, and that's been like for one audience. But then the smaller groups, the interactive, conversational presenting oriented, which is more around the salespeople. So it's a great use case and one that we've seen that salespeople have definitely gravitated towards because, here's another thing. There's a ton of presentations that are out there. And after a while, every PowerPoint presentation starts to look the same. So if you do something a little bit different, you also stand out from the crowd.
Absolutely.
So you want to be a salesperson to look a little different. We also have parts of the product because we've thought about Prezi as a full lifecycle presentation tool. It's the creation side, it's the presenting side, but then there's also the back end, which is the analysis, which, 5 minutes after you're done presenting, how well did you do? What did people look at? So we also have built that into our products, so it informs back to the sales team to say, hey, they looked at it, they didn't look at it, or if they did look at it, what did they find most interesting? And it really, what's great about it is it helps inform improving your presentation for the next time. So you can actually know what areas to focus in on or what areas maybe you need to spend some time and improve a little bit.
So you have those analytics because somebody creates a Prezi, they're hosting it. I mean, Prezi's hosting it.
Yes. Yeah. So there's an analytics link and you would share the link. Yes, exactly. Based on permissions. And you have the ability then to track that performance. And we have integration to both Slack and Salesforce. Mm-hmm. So you would see that wherever, you spend your time as a sales professional or sales manager.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the collaboration aspect of this because this I think is really a powerful one. You guys are probably familiar with Dan Rome, who's written a great book, many great books, but Draw to Win, where it talks about, you get up on the whiteboard, you start drawing this out, and then you stop, when you go a certain way through it, and you invite the customer up and to help complete the drawing. In that case, then they start assuming some ownership in the collaboration that you've got going. So what's the analog or the analogy there with what you do with Prezi?
So if you are developing a presentation with a customer in the event, like, for example, you have a champion at that account and you're trying to create this presentation, there's co-edit, there's collaboration, there's tracking, when people made changes, it's actually up to date and it's for example, in your Slack, if you actually have a one and it'll show up in the Prezi folder. So we have this notion of, the collaboration, the creation process is baked into how Prezi is created. It's not 100% equivalent. You wouldn't go up and draw on a Prezi, but no. You could absolutely zoom in on whatever areas that was most interesting. Sure.
But I going back to the comment you just made, is do you have customers actually collaborating with their customers in the development of a Prezi?
We have, we have, for example, when we help create Prezis with customers, absolutely, we have shared Prezi collaboration. They have customers inside their own teams collaborating and creating their own Prezis. So yes, there's any kind of group you're trying to put together would be a collaboration group to do that for co-editing and commenting.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be very interesting in sort of an enterprise situation where you've got multiple stakeholders, and before you've got sort of the final presentation to the group that maybe includes the C-level guys pass around the Prezi and have them edit and add.
Absolutely. And you can set up the permissions based on, what role you want those people to play in the presentation, like view or to edit. Yes. So of course, yes, all those elements. And again, you could even have analytics tracked internally to make sure your team is involved and how much time they're spending on it.
In terms of contributing to the effort itself?
Yeah, sure. Make sure they looked at it too.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. That'd be very useful.
Well,
I think
we use it here some.
Oh, yeah? So how do you use it internally?
Oh, I'm just saying that. So, for example, we'll know, for example, if marketing shares a Prezi, we'll know, if the team actually opened it and viewed it and how much time they spent on it. It's very useful for us to know, is our material resonating?
So how do you work with your sales team to develop content?
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, we'll work backwards. Well, first of all, we have sort of from a marketing perspective, sort of the key messages that we talk about. And for us, there's sort of the product, but there's also, I think I mentioned conversational presenting is more about the capabilities and building out more detail on what it is. It's really important for them to, sort of be the people using the product in the field that helps inform back to us what's really useful, what it enabled them to do. It's great that we have a product that everyone in the company uses, and everyone has a slightly different use case. For example, the head of product is using it to track product stages and different agile sprints that are going on. And then I have people that are doing brand marketing, who are always concerned with, are we ensuring that we have that brand standard guidelines and the standard overview. So the use cases are all different. Salespeople use it to show what's possible in Prezi, but they also have a leave behind that they give to people so they can play with it and see what Prezi looks like. And we have galleries online that you can actually see Prezi examples. And in fact, one thing we just showcased just about, I'd say maybe a little over 6 weeks ago, we actually are previewing Prezi augmented reality and showed that on stage at TED. And so there's many different interesting evolutions of what is a presentation going forward. The future of work is changing, so is the future of presentations. And, we're actually showing examples now of what's possible for people to be part of the story, be in the story. And that's very exciting.
So give an example of that.
So the example I'll use was the one we just showed with Dr. Robert Sapolsky, where he was, this is more of a main tent example. It was one of the first use cases we've introduced, where he's talking about his new book, which is about the biology of decision making. It's a book called Behave. And he has on the screen somebody pointing a gun at him, a visual. And he is able to interact with that as he's talking. The presenter is still front and center, but the engagement is with the presentation next to him. So what you've done is you're not virtual reality where it's its own world. Augmented reality, it's still people first in the center, but interacting with the material that is the presentation to help bring it to life. So it's really fascinating. We're seeing a lot of great use cases for webinars and other kinds of things where people want to have that sort of people front and center. And salespeople, of course, are the people that, they want people to remember who they are and they can have them present in whatever fashion, but at the same time, have them be in the story showing whatever it is that they're trying to promote. It's a preview. We don't sell it right now. We're putting it out there so people can see what's possible, and we'll have more details following on that.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So what other trends do you see in presentations? Because this is one of the key topics. We've talked about this a lot in the show. We've had a lot of different guests on about improving presentation skills. So within the context of using a Prezi, are there specific skills that perhaps, it's not intuitively obvious that you need to have in terms of presenting compared to presenting a normal just slide deck?
Well, I think the structure of Prezi does encourage a different kind of thought. So other than just straight chapters, you got to think of how things relate to each other and what is the logical story navigation you're taking people through. So I think those are important differences when you think about a Prezi versus just a standard linear presentation. So, think about that adaptability and how that would basically set up. And the Zoom reveal capability means like what you have on the top level and what you have on the next level is kind of like, aha, you can kind of dig in, you bring up your next point. It kind of brings people along in an engaged way. And it's almost like a bit of gamification built into it, if you will, because of that whole mastery of, we have on the development side a lot of game thinking built into the product as well. It brings people along. So these are just a couple things. It's not, it's a slightly different way to think about it. But once you start coming down that path, it becomes second nature. At least with me, what's really great is, I'm thinking about, like, when I talk about this, what's the best visual way to explain what it is I'm talking about, right? Is an example? Is there some way that I'm putting this all together? These are all elements that are, when you think about a presentation, you think about the endpoint, what you want people to see at the end of it. But at the same time, you're structuring the journey too. And you're not thinking of it as point A to point B to point C. You got to think about them as, how does this all fit together? And how can I kind of be sure that if I touched on one, right, that it makes sense and it could be self-contained too, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I every time I view a Prezi, it's like, I always think, how'd they do that? Because I mean, well, not just magic, but in terms of as you said, sort of the visual thinking, and I think that's something that I think is an acquired skill. You just got to practice, to think of things in that relationships that are more spatial as opposed to linear. And I think if people have a sort of a knack for storytelling, it's a great tool. They'll adapt to it very quickly.
Yeah, and if you have higher engagement with your presentation, it tends to be remembered more too. So memorable is something that obviously at the end of any presentation, people would want to make sure that, they stand out, they're remembered for what they communicated.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, Nadjya, we've run out of time, but tell folks how they can find out more about Prezi and connect with you.
You are welcome to reach out at nadjya.ghausi@prezi.com. And a lot of the things I've talked about today there's a couple of great sites on the prezi.com website. There's a blog site that has a lot of great research, and as well as some of the examples. We have a gallery, and we have just a lot of things to show. So if you have a chance, listeners have a chance, go ahead and check it out. There's a lot of great information on there.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for joining me today. Friends, thank you for spending this time with us today. Be sure and come back tomorrow for another great episode of Accelerate. Until then, if you get a chance, please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to this podcast, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a review. We want to hear what we can do to make this a more valuable experience for you. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.